start. Taflin, are you up, I'm thinking, on our annual plan? And sorry, Katie, are we all good to go? Sorry, thank you. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Kia ora, councillors. So this is the first of a couple of briefings that we've got on today from this team. So, and it's a bit of a game of two halves. So this first one this morning is around finishing off the annual plan, which obviously will kick in from 1 July. So this is leading up to the paper coming next week to council for the adoption of the annual plan. So Kate's going to run us through that. And then this afternoon, we've got an end of year for the current financial year. So we've just got a couple of briefings running through today for you. So this is a very process-driven one, which the team will run through now. So the team being
Thanks, Kate.
Team being you. Yep.
Kia ora, councillors. So the purpose of today's briefing is just to run you through the key changes that have been made to the draft annual plan following deliberations on the 27th of May. And we're going to provide you with the updated budget information following those deliberations and run through the process for adoption of the annual plan on at the council meeting next week. So the purpose of this slide is just to provide you with a reminder of how we got to where we are at the moment. So we had obviously consultation on the draft annual plan and hearings. Deliberations were on the 27th of May, where we got direction from you to make changes to the annual plan, which staff have been incorporating. At the same time, you also considered changes to the fees and charges schedule, and that revised schedule was adopted at the deliberations meeting on the 27th of May. So that document won't come back to you on the 25th. It'll just be the annual plan that comes back to you. The council agenda for the 25th of May will be published tomorrow, so you'll get agenda pack. So you'll get copies of that coming through tomorrow, and then the meeting on the 25th. And the final step after adoption of the annual plan is to set those rates for the 2025-26 financial year. So coming out of deliberations, there were a number of minor changes that staff have incorporated into the annual plan. This slide is a summary of some of those more significant changes. So we've got there the implementation of the two-zone fare structure for public transport, the removal of the Darfield to Rolleston trial bus service, but adding in that capacity to the Darfield to Christchurch Route 86 service. There's the service improvements to the Rolleston to Christchurch Route 85 service, but just noting that that's the time frame for that is slightly less than the 2 years that was consulted on to allow for staff to do that work to scope that up, and the use of reserves to progress, PT reserves to progress a number of pieces of work through the 2025-26 financial year. And just at the bottom there, just a reminder that the total rates revenue increase was reduced from 9.9% that was consulted on down to 5.8% as a result of those decisions made at deliberations. This slide is a summary of where the budgets have landed following deliberations. So you can see on that bottom line there, through the draft annual plan that was consulted on, we were projecting a deficit of $4.9 million. That has improved to a deficit of $3.7 million following deliberations. Because we're going to have a deficit budget for the 2025-26 year, there is a resolution in the adoption paper that acknowledges that deficit position and that it's financially prudent to have that. The main driver for that, as you're probably aware, but that's the debt funding of the regulatory planning program, and that's consistent with the council policy around natural capital and prior decisions that council have made on that particular issue. So for the process on the day of adoption, as I mentioned, you will get the agenda pack tomorrow, and that will go up on the website as well. The council meeting's on the 25th, so there'll be a run-through meeting on the morning of the council meeting. The order will follow what's up there on the screen, so adoption of the annual plan first, and then that will follow with a rates resolution paper, which proposes 6 resolutions with reference to about 75 tables that set the general and targeted rates for the coming year. And then the final sort of closing off of the annual plan project once adoptions happen is to go back to our key stakeholders with a tailored response for those that submitted to us, which will come from the chair. Councillors will all get a copy of the responses that go out. There's already been a stakeholder newsletter that's gone out sort of summarising the key decisions that were made or key direction that was given at deliberations on the 27th of May. All other submitters will get an email acknowledging that the process has come to an end and thanking them for their submission and pointing them to the website for further information on changes made, etc. And then there will be a region-wide campaign just to round out that consultation, and with a particular focus on Selwyn, given the level of consultation we had with them, particularly with those PT changes. And of course, the annual plan will then be published online. So that's it from me. Are there any questions from councillors?
Thanks, Kate. Dion?
Just on that specific resolution that we have to pass around the unbalanced budget. It's always been a bugbear of mine. If we vote against the unbalanced budget resolution, does that mean we can't, as councillors, vote against the rest of the resolutions? I don't know how that may work in the way that the resolutions might be.
I'm pretty sure that you asked this question for the LTP because it was the same issue that came up. But I can't quite remember. I can't remember what the answer is either. Does anyone know?
Can I just get some advice on that? Because it is a particular bugbear of mine. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Dion, I think we'd take them separately. I think that should be possible. So, yeah,
we'll just get the advice. I think it'll be fine. I don't want to make a big thing of it.
Grant?
Yeah, I don't know whether we need. I know you've raised this issue, but we've also explained the reasons, and the auditor, previous audit, have not seen a problem with that. We do identify it in the long-term plan. Do you need bullet points? Do we need an assessment of?
Grant, I understand it. I just want some advice on what the implications were if I was to do that. It's just something that's personal to me that I want to understand. It's not. I don't need to relitigate the budget or anything along those lines. It's just a thing that I have.
Yeah, I think we did do that last time, but yeah, we can get some feedback on that because we haven't seen the resolutions just yet. So, but I'm sure they'll be separated out, and that's possible. But we can get that. Genevieve. Oh, sorry, Grant. Sorry, Genevieve. Grant, you had another.
Just another question. The annual plan budgets, the spreadsheet that you've got there. Does the reserves component fit into that, or is it just totally not? There's no explanation of. In our finance briefing on the 1st of May, we had an outline of the projected reserves.
And Giles is happy to answer that.
So this is the operating budget. So the reserves is the cumulative impact of everything that's happened to date, and I think Dave covers the expected position in a later slide in a later presentation.
Yeah,
that's what I'm probably looking.
We're going to get to that later.
Later slide. Okay, thanks.
Yep. Genevieve.
Yeah, hi, I hope you can hear me. I had issues earlier in the day, so apologies. Just with regards to the stakeholder engagement, and you mentioned a newsletter, a letter or memo newsletter that went out to stakeholders regarding this and the rates. First of all, could we have something potentially circulated just to the effect of what that newsletter said, and also who those stakeholder that you mentioned, the groups are, because they do differ based on what we're doing. So it would be quite nice to know who that was sent to.
Yeah,
Thanks.
we can do that. No trouble.
Thank you.
Thanks, Genevieve. Any other questions, councillors? Doesn't look like it. I think everyone's pretty clear. So just the thing when Darren and I went through the draft agendas with the staff, I think there's two papers. There's the annual plan adoption, and then there's the rates resolutions. So, and that's the 75 odd tables, which you've seen before in other long-term plan, annual plan processes. So it's there's lots in there, but yeah, just be mindful that there's quite a lot in those resolutions. Even though there's only like 2 resolutions, there's 75 tables attached to one of those resolutions. So, ka pai. And that's showing all the different rates for different parts of the region. So, sweet. Thank you. Thanks, staff. We're right on time. Oh no, we're a bit early. Are we happy to carry on, or we'll take a few minutes? We'll get the team that's up next down. So just have a little bit early. We're still ahead of time, so that's good. But I'll hand over to you, Stuart and Giles, and we'll get into this public transport asset control strategy stuff. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, Council. So this conversation is taking us on the next step on our journey of public transport strategic asset control. I'll take the slides as read, but keen to go through several of the points in here. I'm going to just talk a bit about history beforehand, just to set the scene again and remind everyone the journey we've been on, and then give you some sort of context from a policy alignment perspective, and outline what we intend to do next with this piece of work, leading into a council decision to approve this strategy as a strategy going forward, which will influence our future procurements and enable any potential investment decisions that council might make in the future to line up nicely with the strategy in our regional public transport plan. So we've been on this journey for quite a few years now. We started back in 2021 when it was made clear that there was a risk with Ferry Road, which is one of the key depots on our network. And the potential loss of depots is an issue that other PTAs are experiencing around the country. Wellington in particular have had significant issues in this space, and indeed are a lot further along on their path of strategic asset control than we are, recently procuring some more land for depots in Wellington. And then in 2022, the government did an amendment to the Land Transport Management Act based on quite a significant amount of engagement with industry to make it more efficient and improve the opportunities for public transport authorities to gain more control over strategic assets such as depots and charging infrastructure in particular, recognising that those assets have a very long useful life, much longer than the contract terms that we engage with, and that PTAs and government collectively are investing a significant amount of money over future years to decarbonise our fleets. And so that sort of triggered this desire to get a little bit more control over that investment and those assets. We've subsequently done quite a bit of work, you might recall, with Deloitte, who have been to see you on a couple of occasions and presented findings from some investigations that they've done with us, landing on some preferred options which are outlined in the draft strategy which you've received. And then subsequent to that, we've been engaging with Christchurch City Council around the opportunities that surround Ferry Road and what might the future of that piece of land be. And then also we've consulted on our regional public transport plan late last year, which included some clear signals in that document of our intention to explore further the control of strategic assets. And Council will be adopting that plan next month, I think, we hope, yes. And so now we've culminated in writing a draft public transport strategic asset control strategy. It's useful to note that we've leveraged the experiences out of Greater Wellington in developing this document. While it is very ECAN specific, we've taken similar approaches to what they have done. They consulted on their plan as part of their long-term plan approach because they were imminently making investments and have done so since. So we've used a lot of their learnings and experience to help us finalise our document, incorporating all of the input and analysis work that Deloitte have done with us. So as I said, the purpose of this strategy is really to give us shape for the investments that we are going to be making over our next procurement rounds, next two rounds of procurement, which will require significant investments to decarbonise our fleet, and those assets that we're going to fund, either directly or indirectly, have a much longer useful life than the terms of the contracts that we will engage with. And so the strategy doesn't influence the quantum of money we pay, it influences how we choose to pay for those assets. And as you'll see in the documentation, there's several ways of doing that. We can choose to procure outright and own assets. We could choose to lease assets, or we could choose to stick with the status quo and let the operators take that risk from a ownership perspective, but we would carry the financial risk in terms of paying more above the odds for those assets, so less value for money. So the strategy outlines those different options and has spent some time evaluating the various options, considering whether it's fleet or land or infrastructure assets on that land, and landing on a view that for control for Environment Canterbury, we feel that the best place for the ownership and risk management of control of fleet lies with the operators, and how we would mitigate the investment process is through transferring assets between contracts. In terms of depots, the best entity who should own and control the land element would be the Public Transport Authority, and that might be through ownership or leasing, long-term leasing. And then the improvements, it really depends on the nature of the improvement, whether we choose to partner with a development house or with an operator or do it ourselves. So there's a lot of flexibility there depending on the opportunity. We've looked at the various components I've just talked about and sort of narrowed them down into this simple perspective. Obviously there's a lot more behind this, but it just helps us to sort of focus where the opportunities are for council in the future and what the narrative and the strategy is articulating. Finally, we've done some looking at our various policies to make sure we have alignment with policies that council have already approved, and particularly when we talk about capital assets, etc. And I'm not going to read through all this, but the work that's been done with our legal team gives us comfort and confidence that we are aligning well with existing policies to enable us to take this next step with this draft strategy document. One of the key things I wanted to cover was what we would do next with this document. Our intention is to engage directly with a core group of key stakeholders to get their input and feedback to this draft document. Those stakeholders will include incumbent operators, Bus and Coach Association representing potential new operators coming into our market, territorial authorities which have an interest in assets, and in this case up here, the Ferry Road obviously, and some other sites around the city. NZTA, of course, is a key funder. To get a sense of what their perspective is on the strategy to help us shape the final document for council to adopt. And we plan to do that in July, subject to council approving that process in your June meeting. And then we hope to bring back to council in August a final document for consideration. That's kind of the time frame we look at. I know the slide says September, but we're trying to go as quickly as we can. I'm going to leave it there for questions.
Thanks, Stuart. So just this is like the actual strategy document.
That's correct.
Cool. So that's what would come to us at the council meeting.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So,
Thank you.
So what you've been given is obviously these slides, the draft strategy document, and another document which outlines all the thinking that's gone behind, which council has seen in previous briefings over the years.
Cool. Thank you. Questions, councillors? Yeah, Dion, Claire, and Peter.
And just in regards to the ferry road, the document will enable us to sort of have a bigger picture. But is there any movement on that particular issue at the moment, and how would the consultation and the engagement that we're doing with this potentially influence that? Do you think there'd be any negative influence or positive influence either way?
So, in terms of the conversations around Ferry Road, as you'll know, there's been a few briefings that have been held with this council and also with the City Council. My understanding is that they have a paper going to their full council shortly in relation specifically to that issue. Our view in relation to this strategy is that it sets that wider context for that conversation, but also for future similar conversations. And what it does do is opportunity to highlight the importance of those assets over time to the effective running. So it actually creates a platform to have a wider conversation with relevant stakeholders, not just about a specific site, but about broadly how we run and operate public transport services and infrastructure across Canterbury.
No, I just think if we pass this, when is that meeting? Excuse me. When is that meeting scheduled for the City Council? Have you any idea?
I believe it's not till the middle of July from memory.
That's great, because I think it would be really useful to have the strategy in front of the councillors there before they have that meeting, so that actually timing might work out.
Thanks, Dion. Claire?
Thank you very much. Look, I've looked over the draft version 2 that's in here and pretty comfortable with where you're going and how it's being outlined. I just would ask whether we could change Environment Canterbury for Canterbury Regional Council in the narrative, please. Thank you.
Cool, I've just been looking at that myself, Claire. Might be a way we can do it where we just refer to the council in lots of places other than the start, of course. But anyway, I'm sure we can figure that out. Peter?
Yeah, thank you. I'm interested to know that the business case assessment that you've done that clearly puts bus ownership with the operators. I'm struggling with that a little bit because those contracts are so long, and the margin that must be in awarding a contract for the life of a bus has got to have an opportunity in it. And so what is the basis for making that decision so definitively?
Through your institute, there's a couple of elements that influence that thinking that's been done. First of all, there's one of competency. Environment Canterbury has really no competency in owning and managing buses, particularly electric buses, whereas we know that the operators have significant experience and competence in that space. Recently, or not recently, in the last 2 years, you might recall government, through the SURF funding, provided some funding to enable public transport authorities to accelerate the decarbonisation of the fleet, and we procured 12 additional EV buses with that funding. One of the conditions of that funding was that those assets were transferable assets, because government wanted to ensure that the investment they made was spread across the lifetime of the asset. And so that's the key principle behind the transferring asset component, is that the asset will have around about an 18 to 20 year life. Contracts are for 9 years. So vehicles purchased any time through those contracts are useful and valuable to us over multiple contract periods. And given that both NZTA, through government through NZTA, and public transport authorities through our rates are funding those buses, the expectation is that we derive maximum value for that investment over the life of the asset. whereas the risk at the moment is that we pay above the odds for those assets because of the length of the contract price and the potential for those assets to be stranded if that operator doesn't win the next contract, and thus they build that risk into their price.
Sorry. Subsequent question or another question associated with that. So my understanding is that once we've moved from the public transport operating model that was in place, that actually you've just described the basis of that around a 9-year contract to a sustainable future public transport model that's available at the moment. And I haven't seen the detail in that, so you'll forgive me. But the whole idea about that was essentially inquiring as to how you could get better value for money for the ratepayers. Now, I take it they say that there's no experience within this building to run buses, and I 100% agree with you. But that doesn't mean that through the creation of another entity that we couldn't put something like that in place to extract the value that is obviously there in terms of what's going on. And so when I see a hand go up and say, oh, we can't do this because we haven't got the competence, I'd like to question, well, you can buy competence, you know. We could do a joint venture with bus companies. We could, to take some of the risk out of things that you were talking about. And to me, I find we're a bit like belts and braces organisation, like we don't want things to fall over, so we actually double down on the security aspects that we put around on those things. Now, I don't need an answer to that, Stuart, but that's how I'm thinking of it. When I see that, that's how I think about that.
Kia ora, Peter. Yeah, I think there's been some really good work here on this, and it's been something we've been talking about for a few years. And what I see is that, you know, when I looked at the sort of assessment that you've done on the operator control versus the end-of-term transfers versus the asset ownership by ECAN, yeah, and you acknowledge that the ownership by ECAN ultimately achieves that out objectives better, which it does if you add the sort of numbers up there, or add the green and orange and whatever squares up. But pathway to the sort of pathway one is pretty close, and you know, explaining how that works. So my question was, and I think that is a good sort of short-term, medium-term solution, but does pathway one also facilitate a possible pathway two later if we wanted to? Is that possible? So, you know, sort of go into what Peter's asked, like, is that possible with the end-of-term transfers?
So the answer to that is yes. I mean, the strategy identifies, if you like, 3 tactics that Environment Canterbury can employ at any time. So tactic number 1 is the status quo. Just carry on what we're doing for a period of time, and then you might want to change tactic. And tactic number 2 is the transferring asset for everything. And tactic number 3 has ownership in it. So the pathway 1 and 2 are the 2 pathways that provide the opportunity for control. And then we talk about the mechanism of control. And the mechanism of control ranges from transferability to ECAN actually injecting itself into the ownership space, either or more active control through leasing or through actual purchase of assets. So it's not suggesting that there is only one path you can choose. Circumstances will determine what path is appropriate at that time.
And so the strategy provides for all 3, but it's got to focus on pathway 1 at the moment as a next step.
Yes.
And then pathway 2 is still open to us, and obviously the base case is still there too. So it's just allows you to sort of be a bit more nimble with the tactics going forward.
Yeah, and if we think about current state, we currently have buses in our fleet which are transferring assets. So we've gone down that path with support from central government. We've currently been exploring opportunities to buy some land for depots. And we've been exploring opportunities to lease land for depots. So that's both. That's all. It's all of those things. Yeah.
But I think it's a good acknowledgement within the strategy that pathway to the ownership is ultimately achieves the objectives better, which is a good thing. But it just depends when you turn that on.
Yeah.
And like you said, with depots in particular, that might be one we are using pathway to the ownership, not for all depots, but for some. So I think that's I really support sort of what you're doing. I think it's a really good bit of analysis. It shows what's possible, what can be done. The other question I had was around for the EV depot developments. You've got those sort of three tactics again. So transit agency led, investor led, operator led. But I didn't see like the analysis of like what one of them is better or worse. Or where again is it just all three are potentials? Can you give us a bit of?
Yeah.
That's this page, people.
Yep.
If you
Yep. I understand that.
wondering.
I think I've probably got that on one of the slides actually. Yeah, this one here.
Yep.
So what we're trying to do with the strategy is to, in some ways you could say, is to have our cake and eat it too, because circumstances that we might be confronted with will be better addressed with one or another of these approaches. So as you mentioned, we might not need to own all depots, but there may be a situation where we need to particularly purchase some land to own the land of the depot, whereas in another case, leasing may be the best option for us. So it's keeping our options open so we can choose the right tactic for the situation that's in front of us.
I reckon in the strategy, maybe I don't know if it says it that simply.
Right.
So it might just be good to state that these are three approaches that we would use based on the case by case. I think that would be helpful because then it's clear. Because at the moment it's like because we've done the analysis on the other bit and that's sort of got some favourable things, but this one's got no analysis and don't know where we're heading. But if it's that all three of them are good effectively, I think that's a really good thing to include. So thank you, Giles.
I probably just add and hopefully pick up some of the points that Councillor Scott was raising. I think the intent behind this strategy is a couple of years ago we got support to continue exploring these options informally from council through briefings. This in effect gives formal endorsement to all of those options being on the table. And as Stuart said, we currently have no investment decisions in front of us. However, this provides the organisation with that approval from council to progress our objectives of efficient and effective public transport, including control of assets, through a number of options, with any individual decision being subject to normal decision processes through council. So it does codify, in effect, what we have previously brought to council, and I think that the chair's suggestion of making that clear up front, that these are a range of options that we can use depending on the circumstances in play at any one time.
Cool. And I do note on page 14 of it, it does summarise it right at the bottom in the green boxes there about what the strategy sort of is for the next 9 or so years and then beyond. So I think that is covered there as well, but just good to link it back. Any other questions, Grant?
Thanks for this. It's good trying to put all that together, and you've got the analysis there and the link back to the RPTP. I'm just looking at page 10, the options for EV depot development. There's no option there for ECAN's involvement in terms of what's like in terms of a partnership scenario is sort of like option D.
So you through images, just to clarify this, when it says transit agency, that's us.
Yeah. It's probably just a flash away of saying public transport authority. So maybe it's just we get it clear that so people do understand what we mean by. Yeah. Cool.
bracket or putting some reference to Environment Canada, the Canterbury Regional Council. Yeah, I mean, as Councillor Scott's saying, in terms of processes and other things that we need to discuss in terms of asset building, if you know, that would be good. God, I had another question.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think in terms of partnerships across them, I think that's inherent in what is being put there. But again, it might be good to specifically say that you know these three tactics used together can be used in partnership or whatever. You know, that's possible. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking at the moment our public transport system is a shared responsibility with Greater Christchurch Partnership, which involves other TAs, city, those sort of things. So, but that's not to say that in the future that we could do. My second question was going to be pathway 1, pathway 2. Presumably, if things changed rapidly, that the only obstacle to moving forward in one direction or the other would be the transition, the length of time of the transition process. But if you know that you could take control of the asset a bit quicker, then but you'll still be obligated to a contractual situation.
Just thinking of an example to answer that question. If we think about a depot, for example, that's currently privately owned, the owner of that land and improvements may not want to sell, but they may be comfortable with a long-term lease. And so, and we may decide that's an ideal location for our depot. We really want to use that site, but our only option is to lease it. Or the owner might put both options on the table, lease or buy. And we may then choose to do an economic evaluation of those two choices, and depending on the mindset of the council of the day, we'll choose one of those two options. Yeah.
Again, there's that flexibility there as part of the process going forwards, which I think is smart. So thank you. Any other questions, councillors? No, I think it's really good. Like Dion said, it's good to get this to us, to make it public and get that out there so that, people are clear about what we're trying to do, what, the good analysis and thinking we've done on this. So it's really good. Thanks, Stuart.
So just to clarify then, I'm going to, the three things I've heard, I think are reference to our entity's name, Canterbury Regional Council, make it clearer around these are choices, tactics that we can apply depending on the situation, and make it clearer around partnerships and relationships, opportunities.
Yep, that's pretty good. Peter?
I think, look, I honestly think, not cynically, I think this is a tactical document, not a strategic one. I mean, it's strategically pointing out public transport, but tactically, some of the stuff that you've got in there, I agree with. That's quite smart, actually. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Thanks, Stuart. Look forward to seeing it. Thank you. So we're ahead again. We're doing good. Maybe it's because we got we've got some good council.